Alex, we have a short break, and then there's going to be a session on post-COVID, I think. Is that correct?
Yes, and what I would like to do is just move to the next session immediately, as we would be right on time. I believe we have our facilitators present right now. And as well, I'm noticing most of the sessions, the panelists are here as well. So Yvonne Hammond is a counselor of the town of Collingwood. Marilyn Struthers, a principal at M. Struthers & Co. and former chair of social innovation at Ryerson University. And Miss Liz Reichert, independent strategist and systems change facilitator for complex problems, are our facilitators for this session. I give the floor to you.
Okay, well, good morning. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished leaders from across the world. As we gather here, we look to each other. We look to each other for hope, for inspiration, and for ideas, because none of us have ever had to lead a community through or deal with impacts of such an infectious disease as COVID-19. People have had to pivot, retool, rethink what needs to be done and how are we going to do them. Hence the title of our session this morning, which is, sorry, just scrambling here because we're starting early, which of course is Mapping the Road to Recovery, Doing Better, and as it is the top of mind for all the speakers, panelists, facilitators, and participants this morning, I'm going to start by introducing our two expert facilitators and our panelists. Following the panelists, we're going to have a video presentation, and then we're going to have more speakers followed by a facilitated session. So this morning, as Alex has indicated, the co-facilitators and moderators with myself are Marilyn Struthers, who is a principal at M. Struthers & Company and former chair of social innovation at Ryerson University in Toronto. As you will see, Marilyn is one of the Canadian experts in this field of social finance. Liz Reichert, who is an independent strategist and systems change facilitator for complex problems, and again, as you will see, an expert facilitator, and we'll find out more about that when we deal with our panelists. In terms of our speakers, we have four to begin, and I'm going to introduce them all at once. So the first one is Micah Mendenhall, who is a counselor of Spanish Forks and president of the Utah League of Cities and Towns. He is serving his second term on City Council, supporting a number of town committees. He has also previously served as the president of the Spanish Fork Area Chamber of Commerce. Secondly, Daniel Goudert is the founder of the Rural Association for Community Development Action. He is a Norwegian national from Kenya Humanitarian Development Response and a resilience professional with over 20 years experience. This experience comes from working with World Vision International in Kenya, Somalia, South Sudan, and Plan International, UNFAO South Sudan. As a consultant, he's recently been building resilience programs in rural livelihoods using off-grid solar systems to enhance livelihood value chain in cold storage. Don Mitchell, serving his second term as mayor of the town of Whitby. Don has served on Whitby Council for 25 years. His focus has always been on building complete communities with strong downtowns and maintaining the quality of life that Whitby residents value. Lastly, Young King Zhu is director of University Research Center for Urban and Environmental Studies in a university in China. She has published on property-led urban redevelopment, real estate market risks in China, and public interventions towards urban sustainability. She has work experience with UN Habitat for consulting and training. She is a member of a number of professional associations and an editorial board member of Journal of Chinese Architecture and Urbanism. I believe our last speaker will not be joining us in person, but will have a video. So to start, I would like to turn it over to our speakers, and to start with Michael Mendenhall. Is Michael there? All
Hi,
right.
Yvonne. I don't see Michael there. I believe we should move to Daniel.
All right. Thank you, Alex. Daniel, are you there this morning?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much for having me. The topic is building back better and differently, impacts of COVID-19 recovery, town development sustainability, navigating turbulence in pastoral townships and seeking pathways to recovery. I've sent my presentation this morning, so just a few minutes ago. I don't know if you've received it, but I can go through quickly.
Sure, Daniel. I am checking my emails right now. I see it.
Okay. Just to quote from David Ben-Gurion, said, "It's not enough to be up to date. You have to be up to tomorrow." And Nelson Mandela, the late Nelson Mandela, said, "Poverty is not an accident like slavery and apartheid. It is man-made and can be removed by actions of human beings." So to introduce the post-past crisis and building resilience, just to introduce the topic, the global crisis experienced in COVID-19 is a large-scale mimic of Japanese tsunami in 2011 and USA Hurricane Katrina in 2006. 2004 Indonesian earthquake, which triggered the tsunami affecting 14 countries along the Indian Ocean and has affected 228,000 lives were lost, according to CARE 2014 report. The humanitarian community got a lot of experience, says prepared, informed reaction to governments and institutions during this time. Humanitarian community really has gained and learned to build resilience because of this Indonesian crisis. COVID-19 helped define new ways for governments and private sector to deal with the effects of this crisis. Building examples of responding effectively in crisis and building resilience better and differently. I'm giving an example to Norway. In this case, Norway during the tsunami of 2004, was hit. The country was really hit by the crisis. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as the key ministry involved in looking after the Norwegians abroad, used their lessons learned to respond with caution, methodical, and proactively during the COVID-19. The Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs headquarters in Oslo learned from the tsunami and built better mechanisms in crisis management of COVID-19 response, in keeping its mission staff abroad, its mission communities abroad coordinated, prioritize all the action responses effectively to the needs of all the staff requests. In this I mean making methodical and coordinated flights to key staff who have to be vulnerable in one way or the other, especially staff with children. The work at the missions running with no major disruptions, such as layoff, stoppage of ongoing programs. The learning from this crisis then informed that regular virtual meetings, updates, working on ways to work remotely, rotations, all inform building back better and differently. Learning from crisis, from my perspective as a Kenyan, and I was living in Ethiopia then when this crisis struck, the Kenyan townships, counties compliant with social distancing, especially the use of M-Pesa. The mode of payment was very much in use than previously, before the COVID. Instead of cash-based transactions, while enforcing lockdowns in major urban towns with COVID-19 cases. So the government really has to do the lockdowns, and also the M-Pesa mode of payment was widely embraced. In arid and semi-arid lands, regions, low COVID-19 infections were reported first due to geographical factors and livelihood systems, especially because pastoralists have their livelihood systems are goats and cows, and their grazing mode of operation. So that really made them not very affected. New patterns within financing and investment for recovery in COVID-19. Businesses devised ways to mitigate disruption. Supermarket food stores went online, deliveries, personalized deliveries using motorbikes and such like. So the private sector need to build new models of business collaboration similar to consortiums in humanitarian sector. In this, I mean businesses need to mimic how humanitarian sector respond to crisis, because after the tsunami, the humanitarian sector really had made huge strides, especially using the cluster system. UN cluster systems really improved the way humanitarians coordinate and work together in sectors and in teams. So the same way, private sector need new ways to collaborate, working together, doing consortiums, and things like that. This mitigation measure, especially ICT sectors, has given solution to COVID-19 challenges, especially online education platforms. So in Kenya, a lot of ICT and IoT, Internet of Things, were used to give online platforms to schools. So that is ongoing. Negative effects in working in silos, lack of information sharing for private sector. I think that is a lesson learned, that private sector need to work around information sharing so that they can work together effectively. Compared to humanitarian sector, cluster working groups, sectoral working groups, water and sanitation, most of service delivery is centralized, especially to the humanitarian sector. So they have centralized humanitarian service delivery using logistic cluster, as compared to the private sector, which is not the case. Almost finished. Key challenges to build resilience in institutions in towns. Institutions can internalize lessons learned in managing COVID-19 and do assessment that inform strategic decision to cope with shocks in supply chain, in crisis management, and ensure business continuity. Example of supermarkets activating e-commerce as mitigation measure. For example, in India, the Indian big basket shifts focus in demand and amid disruption of supply chain. The same way to supermarkets, some of the supermarkets in Kenya have gone to online platforms. Organization takes stock of the human capital, identify within layers competencies to identify, talents utilized, and management to take note. So this is how organizations take note to their human capital in all levels. Leadership resists the urge to centralize authority, because central authority is prone to isolate itself from those who have more experience, frontline staff who interact daily with stakeholders. So centralized authority in leadership need to be at minimum during crisis, or to be a way to look at it. Ability for organization to allow space to be messy and away from command and control, or doing things with less. These are lessons learned from crisis organizations research that encourage smart improvisation and critical innovation. Messy means is to get work done beyond and above following procedures. Factors for governments, businesses, communities, for local communities to recover. Governments can give tax breaks as incentives to increased food production while getting access to markets and encourage value chain in food production. Cold chain in warehouse storage sector, because around 40 to 60% of the whole value of food chain from farmers are lost using through poor warehousing. So that's to mitigating loss along agriculture food chain. Agriculture businesses and food chain, especially processing and value addition, is needed to be incentivized. Pastoral livelihoods and rural communities need investment in cold chain warehouses. Similarly, use of refrigerated trucks to get beef, milk, fruits to the urban centers where they are major consumers. Provide stimulus financial support to build agriculture food chain. Diversification of the economy through ICT, Internet of Things, in service sector. For example, M-Pesa in Kenya is a disruptor over and above the financial sector. So this is just an example of diversification and use of ICT in Internet of Things. Action key to build back affected sectors of the economy. Encourage local investors to focus on value addition of raw materials and give priority for local and diaspora is key for this as a resource to be built upon. As direct foreign investment take long-term view in this case. The pandemic brought about strength in communities locally, nationally, and globally. In Kenya, mechanisms in private sector house owners cultivated a sense of empathy, togetherness. In urban centers, in the midst of shutdown and layoffs, redundancies triggered taking action to deferred rents. Some rents were reduced and some of the landlords gave rent sabbaticals. All these to mitigate stress of the affected stakeholders, those who are in the rent category. In terms of communities, citizenry vigilance to raise up and catalyze as a catalyst to policymakers to act. This is the Kenyan example of Jomo Kenyatta International Airport on a go-slow to protest the direct flights from China during the COVID, triggering Kenyan government to stop flights, international flights, both to China and other parts of the world, as a response to the shutting the airspace to mitigate COVID-19. That is the last slide, and thank you so much for listening. The references are down there. Hello.
Hey, Councillor Hamlin, I think you're muted.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that presentation. It was very interesting, and also good to remember that previous crises have led us to have greater knowledge of how we deal with the current one. Our next speaker is Don Mitchell.
Hello,
Yes. Hello, Don. Would you like to proceed?
I would. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So a lot of interesting discussion and a lot of great ideas I've heard. Let me start by just saying that the virus we're all facing now is serious, but certainly global warming is way, way more serious. And the two may well be interrelated now and going forward. And I just want to give a bit of background to my main comments. It was around 2005 when it finally sunk into me that global warming was a very serious and accelerating threat that collectively we were failing to address. We have a Durham Regional Council. I helped initiate a roundtable on climate change, which was a series of citizen experts. We developed excellent mitigation and adaptation plans, community energy plans. But when we brought these forward for support, serious support, to make serious change, there was a lot of resistance at the political level. And I believe that resistance reflected the lack of general concern broadly for serious action on climate change. And when you look at my town, Whitby, which is part of Durham Region, during my time as mayor, we've declared climate change an emergency. We have certainly developed sustainability guidelines, home retrofit programs. We're about to release a new green standard, which will be the first in our region. We're a bee city, a monarch city. Our focus has been walkability, downtowns, compact development, etc. Which is just to say we have touched all the bases in terms of incremental steps to improve efficiency and reduce greenhouse gas emissions per capita. But despite that, our emissions locally and regionally keep rising because our growth simply overwhelms all efforts to reduce overall emissions. Whitby is slated for about a 50% population growth in the next 10 to 15 years. And certainly that will mean steadily rising emissions for us. So I want to start by saying that our response in Ontario and in Canada generally, but focusing on Ontario to the pandemic, has been extremely strong, extremely united, and most interestingly has been extremely nonpartisan. Premier Ford, who his party represents the right-wing sector, if you would, of Ontario politics, his government has consistently followed the science through this pandemic and made difficult decisions based on the science. So the question is begged as why the response is so strong and consistent with the pandemic, yet quite very much the opposite with respect to global warming, where the science is much clearer and more long-standing. And what role does personal vulnerability and immediacy play in this different outcome? Because that is exactly the outcome we need with global warming: strong and consistent and nonpartisan. And what opportunity is there through this pandemic to start to build the consensus that we all know we need to change? The virus developed, of course, from an event on the other side of the planet. So I think we're all a little more aware that in a fully globalized economy, we are all at risks from across the planet with very little local control. And though everyone will suffer from global warming, no one will escape. Certainly the poorest and the most vulnerable will suffer most and will suffer first. And we need an equitable response to help them address that. But our response here in Ontario and in Canada was to close the borders, to go small, if you will. Jeff Rubin wrote a book about your world is going to get a lot smaller, and certainly it has, and we're very local now. So once the external threats are controlled, we have done extremely well. And we did this knowing there was going to be a huge economic cost, but nonetheless, something about the immediacy of the threat left it to be broadly supported as compared to climate change. So in my experience, after touching all the bases, there are all kinds of great ideas and all kinds of ways to make how we live and move more efficient and effective and reduce our GHGs on a per capita basis. Lots of plans, but we're pretty much out of time for incremental steps, and we need to transform how we live and how we move. And that takes a very, very deep consensus, that kind of fundamental change. So I think what we really need to think about is our focus. You could call it a focus or possibly an obsession with growth, both GDP growth and population growth, which in my political environment, and I expect in most political environments, is seen as a constant and ultimate good, and growth and quality of life are seen as interchangeable terms, which I don't believe is the case. So how will this vulnerability that we're feeling now change that? I guess we'll see how the virus plays itself out. If our medical system saves us again, develops a vaccine right away, I expect we'll default back to the incremental practices we have seen going forward. But of course, those incremental practices, as we all know, are not succeeding, and global emissions continue to rise with no likelihood of any significant reduction without a substantial change. And for me, the notion that we will ever dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions while continuing to prioritize growth and continuing to basically live the same way we've always lived, I don't see that as a realistic possibility. So in short, we want very much to build back better. We want very much to focus on quality of life, to focus on community connections, to focus on walkability and cycling, to get out of the sort of cycle we're on. But we lack the broad support for that direction. And hopefully this will be a global signal that we can do better, and that working together, we can find ways to do the transformative change that's needed, and that maybe that will be if that turns out to be the one silver lining of this this pandemic, it will be a silver lining that has a lot of value. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Don. That was a good reminder to all of us that we shouldn't lose sight of how important climate change is, and how it will help us, no doubt, lead us out of the situation we're in now. Alex, I wanted to ask you if there are any more speakers for this session.
Yes, Mr. Mike Mendenhall is here.
All right, thank you. Mike, over to you.
Thank you, everyone, for having me. I won't take a lot of your time. Mike Mendenhall from Spanish Fork, Utah, a city council member here in Spanish Fork for the last 6 years, and also the president of the Utah League of Cities and Towns. So 248 cities and towns across the state of Utah, and our organization helps share best practices between all of those member cities, and also advocate up at the state legislature for, to collaborate, but to also mainly talk about usually local representation and what that means in our communities, especially when it comes to, the differing opinions, the differing views, the different geographics. I appreciate what was said from the previous presenter here, that the pandemic certainly did bring home a sense of global economic impact, for sure, but how connected we are as citizens all over the earth. In my line of work, besides being a part-time local elected official, I'm a financial advisor, and so obviously it was very real to my clients to watch their investments, go up and go down, and be connected in that way to the global economy as well. So from those standpoints, the opinions that maybe I could lend insight to as a local elected official has been really one of putting party politics aside, I always talk to my constituents about here in Spanish Fork and most of the places in the state of Utah, as far as city officials, we run nonpartisan races. And so you might belong to one party or the other, but that's not what you put on your campaign sign, and that's not what you're asking for people to sign up to share your best ideas with them. And in that vein, the pothole, in Spanish Fork doesn't have a D or an R next to it, but it just needs to be fixed, and the residents just want it fixed. And that's oversimplifying the problems that we have, because obviously the pandemic and the economic fallout is more complex than just a pothole. But again, the same reasoning applies. People don't care about your affiliation, but they just want solutions. And the further they look out for those solutions to a federal solution, or sometimes even a state solution, they come back to us as local elected officials that much more frustrated. So what we've tried to do in Spanish Fork, a population of 44,000 people, is simply say, you know what, the cavalry's not coming. Here's what we can do. Here's some steps to try to help ourselves. And so a few different ways. I appreciate the walkability, the sustainability that was discussed before. We've invested heavily in trails in our community, outdoor exercise equipment. The other things that we didn't know a pandemic obviously was going to hit the world and our area, but those investments have been where people can go, and still the healthy activities that people can participate in. And so on that scale, we've tried to invest in the health and the safety of our community. Obviously, those are interchangeable with mental health as well as physical health. And so we've made sure we're investing in the mental health side of our residents as well. And we're teaching QPR classes, which if you've never heard of QPR, Google it after this. QPR is much like CPR, except for the mental health of individuals. And so we've taught those classes and have people certified to help their neighbors and friends when they see the warning signs of maybe mental issues or even suffering from having suicidal thoughts. And so we've tried to just take our local issues and be local solutions to them. And mental health and physical health have definitely been a part of it. The economic side of it, we've made available to our local businesses through the Chamber of Commerce for opportunities for them to purchase, not purchase, we've purchased for them, hand sanitizer and masks, opportunities for them to apply for business grants that were funneled from the Treasury Department to the state government and now down to local governments. That took a long time, but now we just did get that money last week, and now we're having local businesses apply to us. Instead of the long chain of applying to the government, they're applying to their local government for funds to help them still through some economic tough times and some uncertainty. I said at the beginning of this pandemic on a Facebook post that most of my residents, I think, saw here in Spanish Fork, and I still hold true to it today, and I think it's even playing out. In the first couple of days and week that we knew we were going through something that was going to be very tough, much like you and in all your communities, I'm sure, but we had to run on our grocery stores, right? We had to run on toilet paper and on paper towels and on necessities that in my mind and in time, it didn't make sense. And I was thinking, even my wife, Amber, got caught up in, I got to run out and I got to get more toilet paper. And we have stacks of toilet paper in the bathroom. What are you talking about? Well, what if it's going to be gone? Well, in the end, what I said from the beginning of that is I said, you know what? We're going to make it through this because the world makes it through this. And people that love and serve and live with each other make it through tough things. So we are going to make it out the other end at some point of this. And what we'll have to look back on is how we treated each other through it. And you're starting to see that today. we will survive it, and some of our loved ones won't. I have friends that have had relatives pass away, and that's tragic. In the end, what will happen, what we will have left with is how we treated each other. Did you help somebody when they needed help? Did you help your community when they needed help? Were you that calming voice, and were you there to help lift in the time that needed to be lifted? And I'm seeing awesome examples of that in the state of Utah, cities and towns across the state of Utah, but in the nation as well and all over the world. And that's what people will remember. That's what they won't forget, is how you treated each other during this time. And so that's my words of encouragement, I guess, to this group, is remember that's what will last, is how we treated each other during this tough time.
Well, thank you so much, Mike, for those inspirational thoughts and also some insight on how your community's been handling this unbelievable situation the world finds ourselves in. We're going to turn now to a PowerPoint presentation. It's going to be presented by myself, Marilyn Struthers, and Liz Reichart. And Alex, could you please put that slide presentation up?
Yeah, just give me a second here.
Thank you. Fantastic, thank you. I wanted to start off by mentioning on our second slide who the Institute of Southern Georgian Bay is and why their name is on this slide. The Institute of Southern Georgian Bay is a not-for-profit community think and do tank. It's comprised of volunteers. It was started several years ago by some forward-thinking members of our greater community, and it has continued and gotten stronger over the years and has taken a lead role in what we are doing as we're moving forward. The Institute is currently led by an amazing chair, Rosalind Morrison, and we were just, I would say, 2 weeks into our national shutdown when Rosalind reached out to those of us on the board, including myself, to ask, what are we going to do next? And I have to say, it came as a bit of a shock to me, who still hadn't managed to get out of the chair in her living room. But from that spread the beginnings of discussions that Rosalind led and led then to the 4-part Zoom series that the Institute convened called Road to Recovery. And under Roz's leadership, each of these sessions had panels from 4 important sectors. And the sectors, of course, being local government, philanthropy, business, and the charitable nonprofit sector. I wanted to mention also, in addition to being a moderator, of course, for this morning's session, I often wear 3 hats. One hat as a counselor for the town of Collingwood. I've been a counselor since 2018. Secondly, I'm a lawyer and I practiced for almost 27 years in the city of Toronto in areas of relevance to local government before transitioning full-time to the Collingwood area over a decade ago. And lastly, I wear a hat as a member of the board of directors of the Institute of Southern Georgian Bay. So I thought it was important to say that this presentation is me wearing my hat as a board member of the Institute of Southern Georgian Bay. And it does not, none of this has been endorsed by the town of Collingwood. Next slide, please. To give you a sense of the area we call Southern Georgian Bay, this area is about 150 kilometers north of Toronto. And as you can see from the circle around there, it encircles this part of Southern Georgian Bay that generally runs from Midland around through Wasaga Beach, Collingwood, and up to Owen Sound. There are a number of communities in this area. The Institute of Southern Georgian Bay takes the approach that some issues are better dealt with by looking beyond those local municipal boundaries that often govern everything we do. Whether it's the environment, whether it's social justice, whether it's something like building back better through this recovery, sometimes it's just better to rub out, if I can use those words, the local municipal boundaries and see what we can do together. And so this series that we're talking about you today included the panelists from those 4 sectors, but panelists from this area that we're showing to you. Next slide, please. The mapping, so as I mentioned earlier, this is the team that's presenting to you this morning. Next slide. So the Institute's Mapping the Road to Recovery series, as I indicated, had 4 parts. The first one was about social innovation, mapping our road to recovery. 2, facing the future, a collective arts strategy, which is so important for our region as we have a very robust arts community. And it's also a major driver of our tourism industry. Part 3, strategic investments. What about municipal collaboration and how does that work for recovery? And part 4, how do we work together towards a more resilient, inclusive, and sustainable future? Next slide, please. And I'll turn this over to Marilyn.
Thanks, Yvonne. So what we had in those sessions was much more than we had originally imagined. Putting people together in a virtual room was a new experience for most of us. And working cross-sectorally and then with community participation really gave us a rich discussion and left us really with an opportunity. We had eliminated the usual time and distance problems that regional activities take, in the politics of who's driving to whom. Often those things are real barriers to communities working together. And we had recordings, we had documents, comments, detailed notes. So what we really had from a research perspective was kind of a gift, and we decided to accept it. And these are the questions that we developed for ourselves in the beginning of the summer's very fast lightning research process. So would you switch slides, please, Alex? So really, it's just a typical qualitative process. We did a text analysis from the summary notes and the chat, so we were able to include participants. We identified some key themes for deeper exploration. We did a set of key informant interviews with 6 local leaders, which is really sort of stage 2 conversation because they had all been part of the recovery series. Either as presenters or as participants. We've identified the key elements for building back better. We're still playing with this now. And so part of what we'd like from you, the audience in the chat or in panelists in the discussion, is some thoughts about how does a community know when it really has done it? Some of our themes are so similar to those we heard from Daniel in Kenya. We were just texting each other back and forth. So there's lots to learn here, but how would we know when we had done it? We'll use that to frame principles to guide action. We're looking for data points at this point for change measurement, even though we really don't have good sources for collective data. And then we'll put this out for publication. So next slide, please. So the key themes were really these, and I think by now they will start to sound familiar across the communities that you have heard speak. There are losses in every sector, and even if we don't have the data for that, we can see it. on our main streets. We can see what's happening. And because we are a collection of small towns and rural municipalities, we know that we are not going to be the huge recipients of a government granting, if you like, or largesse to recover. That it really is going to be necessary for us to be able to be a bit more self-reliant, a bit more resilient, to be able to succeed around financial economic recovery. There are lots of new opportunities around the use of technology. We discovered meeting regionally was certainly one of them, but inequity of access is a huge problem. Even today as it rains in my office at home, I wonder if I will lose you all in the middle of our presentation. Regional collaboration, it's clear, is key. And for us, we've begun to define that as intermunicipal, intersectoral, interconnected. But really right now, we lack many of the cross-cutting political and nonprofit infrastructures that would make that possible. And then there's this thought that really refocus on local, look local and mobilize, that everyone has something to contribute, whether it's the way the municipality plays its role, or in the case of we heard about the lack of toilet paper. In Utah, we had a great lack of hand sanitizer, and one of the local vodka distilleries turned their hand to filling that need locally. Next slide, please. And on to Liz to elaborate on what we were thinking about tech as we drill down in those interviews.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Liz Reichert here. This series was a very interesting shift and opportunity to bring together people from the whole region and to hear different ways that people were responding and share the experiences of small towns and villages, and be able to have them learn from each other. And obviously the technology was a big part of that because it could happen so rapidly. And we watched people who for years had resisted the use of technology suddenly embrace it. So the good news was it gave us this great opportunity to come together as a group and to be able to see and be with each other during that time. And we got the benefit of the town of Collingwood's use of their Zoom platform, and they were very, very helpful in supporting us. And we had other sponsors regionally, which were also extremely helpful. So new opportunities, like the local businesses were able to quickly see different ways of being able to engage clients and customers, and where we saw lots of volunteers who suddenly were in more of a at-risk group, had to find other ways to try and support. So we saw some very interesting coming together of social service agencies that hadn't worked together before, for instance, brought together by the local 211 service here in the region, and the town of Collingwood. The municipal meetings moved to the online platform, providing greater transparency for local residents, being able to observe and participate in those meetings. And we saw different kinds of relationships starting to emerge, and people defining quite clearly how they were shifting out of the way that they had traditionally engaged into new ways of doing that. So this was all supported by the online business. Can we move to the next slide, please? I think I named this in, 2 steps forward and 1 step back, because, there was one example of adult learning. It's called the GTLLI, I think the Georgian Triangle Lifelong Learning Institute. And they talked about how with their older population, normally they would come to attend meetings. They now moved online and actually realized they might lose some of their participants because those participants now could see other options that were available to them, which may now spark GTLLI to make sure they're really offering high-end learning experiences. It's this kind of give and take that we've realized we've responded to. The steps back, though, is that there are lots of pockets of very, very poor access. In fact, during our own session, 2 of our facilitators couldn't share slides or be relied on to participate at times because their technology would wink out, as Marilyn likes to describe to all of us when it happens. You know, we've come to some conclusions about the importance of making sure there's equitable access. Of course, public Wi-Fi and places where people would have relied on that, this was impacted in all communities, like the libraries and other places, community centers, public spaces. Those were often closed during COVID lockdown and may close again if we move back into lockdown. I liked one of the earlier presentations, I don't know if it was Daniel or one other person, maybe it was Lynn's presentation, needing to be able to manage ways of moving in and out of lockdown very quickly. I think technology may be able to provide some platforms and solutions in collaborative ways that could make a big difference. Next slide, please. So when I did my deeper dive interview, I interviewed a couple of different people, one in the more social service sector, one in the more business sector, and 2 interesting examples emerged. Here in our region, we have a very connected health team that has been driven for quite a long time. We've seen now it starting to connect with a virtual agency platform, using the broader determinants of health and, you know, doing initial screening wherever that may happen. So it might happen in a doctor's office. It might happen when a paramedic is visiting and seeing someone in multiple times because of mental health challenges, or a senior vulnerable may not be getting enough food to eat or have the economic security. And they're practicing and finding ways where they then do an outreach call, an outbound call through the 211 service to the client, and then can 3-way call with people to do the advocacy work to get them connected to the services that they identify they want or need. And so this is really coming and it's happening. And I think we'll see this really start to grow as we go, because it will help local agencies to support each other to work together. The other model, which we saw, the creative response to one of the members of our design team for the working series, Brandon Houston, he's a person in Collingwood who's a local entrepreneur and runs something called the Collingwood Foundry, which is a co-working space. And he very quickly created a platform, Collingwood Commons, for any business or service that didn't already have an online platform to be able to make those services immediately available for people, to find ways to connect with them, how to get their takeout or how to do curbside. And it really helped a lot as people started to make that shift to the online. And obviously COVID has tipped the balance for many people who might have been saying, well, I don't really need to have the online presence. Now we are seeing definitely they are. And he's created a platform where this is cross-connected. So if you're looking for something, you can go to that common platform. The other thing that he saw as a big trend, and I heard this from, I think it was, maybe it was Daniel, maybe it was somebody else who identified that there was had been this migration from towns to cities for looking for job opportunity. And with COVID, now maybe people will just stay where they are. In fact, what we're seeing here in Collingwood is a reverse trend where we're seeing an outpouring of people from cities out to this region. It's a reasonable drive back to Toronto for short-term visits there, but lots of influx of people coming into the region, reflected in the real estate activity over the summer and other data points, which I think we're going to have to start to really think about how we track those shifts. So he's identifying the need for the integrated kinds of platforms that could not just be everyone in each town identifying what the responsibilities are, for instance, for business owners as they move in and out of COVID recovery and where they may access PPE, etc. But really finding a way to collaborate across a whole region so that anyone, anywhere can go and find that cross-connected information. And he believes that there's ways for us to start to do that both within sectors and across sectors in terms of collaboration. Next slide, please. Back to you, Marilyn.
Thank you, Liz. So local investment, just how we were going to make up the capital shortfall we expect, became the topic really of, I guess it was session 3. And we introduced there a conversation about social finance, which is in Canada, around the world, but in Canada particularly, a growing movement to use business kinds of financial structures to community value, to allow community people to begin to participate, for instance, in purchasing community bonds to finance projects that have social value. So we spent some time thinking about that, and we chose that also as a theme to drill down further in. And we really found that we need to create an enabling environment for social finance, social enterprise, for local stories and language about financing public benefit. And we need to do that within municipalities, within business, and also within the nonprofit and charitable sector. So as our communities change, actually, and we start to see people moving out of the city, sometimes people with high net value who are likely to be donors, we need to be able to think about how we enable investment in our communities, how we enable that from municipalities in different ways and from businesses, as well as from philanthropy. And, you know, we had quite a big conversation about this with someone from the charitable sector, Lee Graves, who was really, really clear that if you're running a charity and you're thinking about doing social good, having a bond really doesn't make much sense. And so we need to create the environment where we have the stories of how this has been done successfully in other communities and what actually it looks like on the ground. This means, I think, we have to create a strategy to take advantages of new approaches to social investment. We have to describe what these things are, and we have to find ways to really expand the diversity of investment options as well as local philanthropic options. Smaller communities don't have a host of foundations. We don't have things like social planning councils. We often do not have the opportunity, simply because we miss it, to take advantage from more traditional calls for grants and so on. So there's a piece of work to be done here to make us more investment ready, but also to really create the instruments to carry that investment. Next slide, please. And in this conversation, as we got to this point, it was really Mayor Sanderson who opened up, in my mind anyway, and I'm sure many others who were listening, a bit of new thinking about the role of municipalities. And I won't remember his words correctly, so no quotes, please, but it was something about the us and them boundaries between municipalities and business and community blurring a little bit as we needed to move more quickly towards creating an environment for recovery. And that is us really thinking that, you know, we don't have a lot of big industry in our communities. So municipalities are really among our biggest spenders. And they have an opportunity here for what I'm calling leveraging leadership. We see this in cities, community bonds backed by municipalities. We see the beginning in industry of procurement processes that account not only to lowest price, but also to production of social value through perhaps creating avenues for like local food, perhaps creating avenues for employment, requirements for community benefit agreements in big contracts. So there's an interesting place here for municipalities to step up with this leveraging leadership that sets the scene for others in business and philanthropy. We absolutely need to grow the exploration of social lending. Julie talked about micro lending, community lending. Institutions or programs are starting to couple up with local credit unions, whole areas that we have not really explored. And in the same vein, recognizing that the arts, most artists, arts companies are both small businesses, and really the big aha for many of us was the degree to which they're an attractor in our tourist-driven economy. But we need to create a regional arts strategy, because for these folks, the loss of venue has been huge due to COVID. And we really can't afford to lose what we have here. And then finally, we just need to be able to expand a catalytic infrastructure to link local dollars to local opportunity. Over to you, Yvonne.
Next slide, please.
Next slide, yeah.
Oh, I think Yvonne is muted.
And have we lost our slides?
No, I think it's here.
Okay, I've lost the slides.
Alex, could you assist us in unmuting Councillor Hamlin, please?
There we go. Thank you. We're going to try and move along here so we can get to our panelists. But this slide and the title of it, Collaboration is the New Leadership, is a phrase that I wrote down in one of our Zoom discussions on municipal collaboration. And as you can see there, it's from Shirley, who's the deputy mayor of an adjoining municipality of Meaford. Collaboration is the new leadership, and I just believe that so much. And we need not only local governments, of which there are at least 10 in this area I showed you on the map, but our county governments, which are the upper tier to the municipalities in this area, there are 2 of those, as well as the stakeholders to share ideas and collaborate. We need to see the sharing of data, which many of the speakers talked about yesterday. I was happy to see, to the key to setting our priorities and including our ability to track the recovery. We need the business, nonprofit, and government sectors to work together, and they have been discussing, and we've heard already discussions around should a sustainable economic future for our region be beyond tourism, which has been a mainstay for much of the area. Also there's much discussion now starting to go on about what kind of platform should we have to support municipalities to collaborate, learn together alongside, not alone, alongside business and our nonprofits. Next slide, please. So we started to identify opportunities for collaboration across what's called borders of the municipalities, whether it be transit, transportation, affordable housing, economic development. But there's not a big appetite for, looking to our province to establish a restructuring of our communities at this point. So we have to figure out collaboration without the need for restructuring. We have to find the opportunities and finance the cost for sharing of data. I think there is a big recognition that data collection is necessary, but the cost of getting it is high. And lastly, we've seen that there is an advantage to organizations, I'll say, like the Institute, although there could be others across this region to help facilitate discussion and get it going. Next slide. And over to Liz.
Okay, so we began to think about some ways that we could develop some principles that would be something that could be key in moving forward. And these elements to the New Road to Recovery, we felt could be kinds of things that people need to consider as they start to build back better. And we're just working on this list. This is a draft list for us from a research perspective. And we would like to invite everyone in the chat to be thinking about these and say to ourselves, are these the right ones? What are we missing? Are there some other elements that you're seeing in your communities that have been critical? So please take the time now and add that to the chat because we'll be using the chat from our session as part of our research today. So I'm just going to go through these quickly. I heard Yvonne's tip towards needing to make sure we need to keep moving, so I won't go through them all in great detail, but I'll hit the ones that I think are really important. And back to the Mayor of Whitby, this notion of stronger regional understanding of local sustainability and self-sufficiency. This, we recognize we work in a global world and our supply chains are global, but I think the COVID piece really strongly recognized the need for people to hold both local sustainability and self-sufficiency and be connected in the larger world, and really understanding what they can do as we need to move in and out of the more reliance on self-sufficiency. The collaborative process that we've been talking about, one of the things we uncovered is that people are pretty good at collaborating within their sectors. They have practices and ways of doing things that work for them, but those practices differ between how municipalities collaborate with each other and may initiate collaboration and support collaboration versus how nonprofits may collaborate with each other versus how businesses may collaborate with each other. And how we start to look at that intersectoral collaboration and ways of working, I think is going to be key, and the development of skills to support that. So we already heard about the need for sharing data and making that a part of everything that we do. So as you come up with key data points, how are we sharing that? That everyone has access to acceptable internet. And is there a role for municipalities or local infrastructure to be seeing internet more as a public service and making sure that we're working in new ways with our internet service providers to ensure those gaps are filled? I know we have had some programs to try and work on that, but nothing seems to be moving. So are there some new ways, now that we've been flipped on our head in this new way of seeing the world, that we can actually reinvent how we make sure that everyone has acceptable internet? And then this idea Marilyn touched on in terms of being engaged with the social as well as business sector for municipalities, and finding investment strategies that look at the local benefit. We saw in the chat, the idea of the B Corps coming in, that triple bottom line, making sure that we're creating some new ways of working so that we're paying attention to that side of the world. And then, of course, active plans to welcome immigrants and newcomers. This is an area that relies heavily on migrant workers, as well as welcoming immigrants to our region. And this is essential for our workforce, but also we need to have the supports and services to integrate and support those populations. And then the sense of small town engagement across sectors. Everyone has something to contribute. And we learned that as we entered into each of these sessions in a very big way, whether it was people giving tips about how they were managing during the initial shutdowns and lockdowns versus how they were attending to beginning to open up and what their challenges were, what their worries were about that. We're all sitting right now poised as kids are going back to school. That's another one where we're seeing people sharing. So I think it's really important that we recognize everyone has something to contribute. So thinking about these as core elements, I think are key. Next slide, please. So is that back to you, Yvonne? Oh, I think she's muted again. Alex, can you unmute Yvonne, please?
Thank you. Thanks, Liz. And so as we move on to our panel, which is on experiences and practical approaches to building back better and differently, I just want to remind the panelists who are in the audience, who are, I see, actively using the chat, that we appreciate that. And we're all taking notes so that we can use them in the final product for this research. So our next event here is to hear from our panelists before we engage in a facilitated session with them. The first panelist, would Maja be there?
Yes, it's Maya. Maya T.
Maya, thank you, Maya. Okay.
Okay, I'm just starting my PowerPoint here, if everyone can see that okay. All right, so thank you so much, everyone, for inviting me to present with you this morning. My name is Maya Tate. I'm currently the president of the Union of BC Municipalities, and I'm also the mayor of the district of Sooke. I've been elected since 2008 and have served as mayor since 2014. Just so where we are, Sooke is conveniently located where the rainforest meets the sea. We're located on Vancouver Island, southwest of Victoria. Our population last census was 13,001. We've been incorporated since 1999, and since then we have nearly doubled in population. So today I'm just going to share a bit about the BC experience and then the perspective of small communities, like one of my own. So like everywhere, COVID has had significant impacts on local governments, and that's certainly the case here in BC. We found that many losing variable revenue streams from things like parking, casino, gaming, hotel and airport tax, recreation, and so forth, as well as a pause in development as the pandemic hit us. It was different in larger communities. It was up to 35% of their budgets, a little bit different in smaller places where we're not as reliant on variable funds. However, like many, we did have to find ways to support our vulnerable populations, and many of us have volunteer-based organizations like our food bank, which are volunteer-led, that came to us very early looking for help. Here in Sooke, we seem to have weathered things rather well financially, it seems. We did make changes to our budget. We shelved some projects, we canceled other ones. We were fortunate to already have webcasting and some significant IT in place. So within 12 hours, our entire municipal operations was able to work remotely, and we were able to find ways to continue to meet in ways on a Zoom platform. We had already adopted a new council procedure bylaw that allowed for many of us to be able to dial in from home. So we were grateful that we had that in place. However, like everywhere else, we did also need to work with our volunteer groups to put a vulnerable shelter together. We managed to do this in our rec center for a few months while the facility was closed. The folks did transition to a park, but thankfully we have found another space where they're temporarily housed, and we're providing wraparound and good sort of life skills support there. So we're grateful that we did have such strong volunteer response from our community to make this work. Like many communities, a state of emergency was not new to us. We have been impacted by wildfire in the past, and several remote and rural communities, that was their reality for a long time. So in many ways, it seems that smaller communities weathered this well because the chain of communication was established, chains of command, who's doing what, and the roles. So we found that when the whole province went into an emergency mode, we started receiving a lot of visitors from more urban centers. It was like they were fleeing the cities to head to the countries. In our grocery stores, we did not see large amounts of hoarding or people picking up vast quantities. Everyone sort of took what they did, but word got out that we had supplies. And so we did see other people traveling our way to do their shopping. So in some ways, while we weren't as open to tourists, it certainly does provide an opportunity to grow tourism into the future. Let's see here. So in terms of what UBCM is doing from the province, we are focused on three main areas to support a post-pandemic recovery: an extension of the property tax deferral program to all homeowners. This enables people to remain out of debt, and it also keeps the local governments whole for their operations. We've been advocating strongly for transit funding, as we know that public transit is a strong part of the recovery for those communities that depend on it, and also seeking a strong infrastructure stimulus framework. We are aware that we see great benefit in new infrastructure funding, as it's generated significant returns for local communities through employment, the flow of dollars to local businesses, and the creation of much needed community assets. We do have excellent working relationships with other levels of government, and we're just waiting to see how this program is going to roll out in BC now that the federal commitment has been made. In addition to this, you may know that cannabis is now legal as a recreational for recreational use here in Canada. UBCM has been advocating for our 25% of revenue of the federal excise tax to flow through to local governments. This is new revenue that will benefit all of us far into the future. And it's not a regressive form of tax like property tax. And so since the distribution system is well in place, we are picking up the advocacy on that here. Here in Sooke, we have a unique opportunity ahead of us. We are in the process of adopting 3 significant planning documents: our Parks and Trails Master Plan, our Transportation Master Plan, both which are in final draft form now. So you can see some of that laid out on the screen here, as well as our official community plan, which we are just kicking off now. What we've realized is so important is for us to recognize and to celebrate our own unique character. We have an amazing local arts and craft industry here, and during the pandemic, our local council, Art Council, even opened their own gallery. Our medical clinic expanded, our library is about to break ground, and we were successful in winning a grant to build and construct a lacrosse box. We have also applied for a significant wastewater grant, and what this will do is clean up our harbor environment, and will also enable us to connect the Sauk Nation, whose lands we proudly share, but they unfortunately don't have this infrastructure where their 2 reserve lands are located. So by doing this, we can help them enable a sustainable future for theirs, and we benefit together by working together. Here's just some pictures of our medical clinic expanding, and what's important for us is the community connections. So the connections with our health practitioners. Our physician group has an amazing team in place that has enabled us to recruit new and other practitioners. And one of the idea, I guess, that sells our community is just the rural nature and how quiet it is out here. So we're very glad that we're starting to showcase these secrets that we've been keeping to ourselves, because we've noticed through the pandemic now that even municipal postings that we're putting we're receiving a very high quality return, whereas before we were always struggling to attract a talent pool to our operations. We're now seeing that a real surge of interest of many qualified candidates coming our way. So we will certainly benefit by drawing from this talent pool. And while I did share that development paused for a minute, it has since kicked up, and we're seeing real estate surges in many places. A house on the street of mine went from coming soon to sold within a week, and other projects that were somewhat dormant, we thought maybe there wasn't an interest, are certainly picking up quite rapidly. In this picture in the middle, I'm standing with Chief Planis and Elder Shirley Alphonse, as well as our Premier, and we were celebrating a grant that the Sauk Nation landed for them to build their community health center. So we're very excited to work together and to share a future together. And just onto the side, we opened one of our trail networks. This is an active transportation that will get our children to the elementary schools. And we know that investing in quality infrastructure that will enable all abilities to walk and roll together are so essential for us. And so here's just some community snapshots. And one thing that we realized is that just early on in the pandemic, we closed our playgrounds, we closed off park benches, but when we gave just our residents a place to be in nature that was unstructured, they made the most of it. You can see here a small child, he's actually my son, hours of fun just playing in the sand, and others skipping rocks. Mountain biking is taking off in our community. We have year-round recreational potential there. And then, of course, this is our accessible walkway here. We recognize that we have a very talented pool of volunteers in our community that we draw from. So this is how we hope to engage and keep our seniors active and healthy in our community, and also building connections with the youth network so that our young people, while they may leave to get educated, will certainly find and build their homes well into the future here. We recognize that we do have challenges in converting our infrastructure. We were designed and built in a rural way that favored the vehicle, and now we're looking at transitioning into a more urban way that accommodates all ages and all abilities. But by doing so, we open up many opportunities. one thing we were criticized on council last year was we built a stairway down to a small waterfront park that had no parking. So naturally there was outrage that we didn't accommodate any cars. But what this did is it provided an outdoor education opportunity for our nearby elementary school. So now we have the ability for those teachers to create outdoor classrooms and outdoor education and connecting the young people to the water. And already they're becoming very active stewards of our waterways, and that will also serve us well into the future. So we're very excited about what we have here. As I mentioned, it's a busy place. We're well aware our staff have done very well and continue to do well working from home. That has saved us significant money in office renovations, hardware, furniture, and the like. And they're doing very well successfully. We also know that we want to encourage our women and support our families. So we're continually looking to find ways to improve access to childcare and working with the providers so that we've already had a shortage that we know, but that those necessary spaces can come forward and provide an affordable option for families. And then also, of course, food security is one that it became very important to us. So while folks were not, we're finding that what they needed in grocery stores, as soon as the farm stands opened, they were overwhelmed by the demand, and we were able to set up our farm market in one of our parks this year, which enables excellent social distancing, but enables the farms to bring their product to market. And if you're not there early, they sell out. So it certainly shows the demand in a local sustainable product, and one that we're very fortunate to have. Outdoor spaces are critical now and going forward, and also encouraging all of our businesses or employers to continue to allow their employees to work from home. For too long, we've been a bedroom community where most of our talent leaves during the day to work in another community. So now we are fortunate to have good broadband, and many of our commuters finding success at home, and continuing and encouraging that will enable them to enjoy more of the community. And for many, they're exploring, although they may have lived here, they're exploring these corners of our community for the first time. So otherwise, thank you very much for this opportunity today and to share a little bit about Sooke and what's happening in BC. And just very grateful to be one of your speakers here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maya. I love seeing those pictures of the island and your community and hearing what's happening on the island in these times. Our next speaker is Farid Amin. Good morning, Farid. Farid is our former Chief Administrative Officer of the town of Collingwood. While here, he successfully implemented a number of major milestones for us and came to us after being the Deputy Manager at the City of Toronto. He's still a member of the Judicial Appointments Advisory Committee for the province. And before entering into the municipal world, he served as Deputy Minister of several ministries at the provincial level, including Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, as well as Economic Development and Trade. Over to you, Farid.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Good to see you. And good morning, actually good afternoon, everyone. We've transcended from morning to afternoon. So good afternoon, everyone. I just want to preface my comment by, first of all, saying thank you to the organizers and thank you to the Urban Economy Forum staff and staff from the town of Collingwood. Obviously, it takes a lot to put together a conference of this nature. And I know when this was initially envisioned, we thought about having an in-person conference, this being an annual World Economic Forum conference in Collingwood, but unfortunately, because of COVID-19, plans have changed significantly. So here we are, and I had the opportunity to listen in to some of the discussions that occurred yesterday, and I think I'm truly impressed by the caliber of speakers that we've managed to put together from across the globe. I also want to thank Mayor Saunderson for his leadership in facilitating this. I know when we had initial conversation about this idea, he embraced it quickly and asked us as staff to move ahead with the Habitat for Humanity folks to try and put this conference together. I don't think I can add much to what has occurred over the last day and a half or so, but I've listened intently to some of the themes that have been spoken about in the last several hours. And one thing that really struck me, which I, as a long-standing public servant, believe in, is the power of collaboration. And we've seen that come together in more ways than not. At the political level, we've seen in Canada, the federal, provincial, and municipal governments working seamlessly to try and deal with this pandemic. And I've seen the strategies employed by all three levels of government to be one that's based on science. So there was, in my humble view, unanimity in terms of the approach exercised by the province, by the feds, and by Ontario municipalities. We also saw, I think, we saw the power of collaboration at the local level. It has been referenced before to some of our local business people in Collingwood turning around overnight to retool and retrofit their operations to try and provide essential PPE to deal with the COVID crisis. So that, in my view, is an example of the resiliency and the agility that Collingwood is, and Collingwood has the potential to replicate. And I suspect that many small municipalities across the globe have that ability to be resilient and to overcome and build back better and stronger after this pandemic. Let me just spend a few minutes talking a bit about some of the unique challenges that I think are faced by smaller urban municipalities, which are not being faced by the large urban megapolis. And we've seen a different approach or a different impact globally, because we've heard from our colleagues in Africa and in other parts of Europe that they saw a significant impact on real estate, for example, and we haven't seen that impact in Ontario. And there I don't think we've seen that impact specifically in Collingwood. In fact, the reverse might be true. And I think that sort of speaks to the differential impact globally that this pandemic has caused. And I've seen a lot of information in the chat line about what are some of the social issues that are impacting on specific individuals, neighborhoods across the world. In Ontario and in Toronto in particular, we've seen the differential impact this pandemic has had on a particular neighborhood. So let me sort of go through very quickly what I believe are some of the major differences between the large urban communities and places like Collingwood. The first and most obvious one is the size and composition of the economy. And we've heard today about the over-reliance on a single industry or a particular sector. And in Collingwood's situation, we're talking about tourism, and also we're talking about the small business sector, which is having a major impact on economic development and economic growth across the municipality. Urban form is also, in my view, a significant difference. We've seen in many small urban communities, Collingwood is no exception, that these communities, these individuals who manage these communities have spent a lot of resources to try and invest in vibrant, active, economically sustainable downtown. And because of that, and many of these downtowns are historic, it is a bit more challenging for these municipalities to retrofit physically to accommodate some of the challenges that we're experiencing as a result of COVID-19. So we don't have the expansive sidewalks. We don't have buildings that have large footprints. On the contrary, also to add to this, many of these buildings are historic in nature, and that historic flavor obviously means a lot to local governments in these communities, and the preservation of that is also an important element that municipal councillors look to. The third one, and I think we've heard this extensively over the last day and a half or so, is the limited financial flexibility that municipalities have. It goes without saying that there's an over-reliance on the property tax base, and in Collingwood's situation in particular, an over-reliance on a residential tax base. So there again, if the municipality were to provide relief to taxpayers, it would largely be to the residential tax base. I'm not saying that that's not a good thing, but in many cases, the industries that require that forgiveness or that deferral might not be captured by some of the municipal instruments, because in some cases, these are not owners, but tenants occupying rented properties. And then the issue that we've heard the mayor also spoke about is the issue around the migration from large municipalities to places like Collingwood, where people might have second residences. And this is a bit of a dichotomy here, because on one hand, you know, we want to continue to welcome people from large urban municipalities, but at the same time, we want to balance that with the need for public safety and the need to make sure that we do whatever we can to curb the pandemic. And the final issue on the challenging side is the whole issue of governance. And Councillor Hamlin spoke to this directly and in the presentation, in the slides that I saw. You know, we cannot let political boundaries deter us from finding ways of working together. And I think, you know, I don't know how many times we need to say that, but elected officials have to understand that there is a need for some level of seamlessness across municipal boundaries. I don't think residents is concerned about where Collingwood ends and Wasaga Beach begins, or where Collingwood ends and Clearview begins. The intention is we're going to have a transit system that's truly integrated. You've got to ensure that is single fare across municipal boundaries. People can buy tickets from different municipal jurisdictions, and there's a sense of seamlessness from a customer service point of view that that's not impeded by political boundary. In terms of what are the solutions to some of these issues, again, I'm trying to go through this very quickly, very cognizant of the time that we have. The first one is the whole issue of, when we've heard about this whole issue of modernization. And modernization from a number of different perspectives. We've all heard about the technology piece, which I think is really, really important. And we've seen this demonstrated in spades about the importance of having that technology to be able to conduct business across the municipality. But even in that, we see how archaic municipal legislation is, because municipal councils actually had to get special permission to be able to conduct meetings virtually and electronically. So I think one of the modernization has to go beyond simple technology. I think we have to look at governance. We have to look at some of the statutes impacting on municipalities. And we also need to look at our own staff and the modernization of the workforce, and how do we ensure that our workforce stay connected. Over the past 5 to 6 months, many of our staff have been working from home. How do you keep the collaboration spirit? How do you keep the engagement together amongst these employees? I think are important considerations for municipalities as well. On the modernization front, there's something what I'm referring to as Vision Zero. And Vision Zero for me means that one of the goals of municipalities should be to try and ensure that they strive for having zero visits to municipalities for over-the-counter services. So people should have a choice of having access to municipal services without physically going to a municipal office. And I think we can do that with technology. Of course, this is not to deny anyone service. If an individual would like to access a municipal service and they want and they prefer to walk in, they should be allowed to do that. But I think municipalities across Ontario and indeed across Canada and globally should look at ways of ensuring that they can serve their population in a way that doesn't require them to visit the municipal building. And we've seen some of that with our building department in the town of Collingwood, where a lot of plans and drawings and approval can be obtained electronically. And I think that modernization should continue to ensure that we continue to provide some of those services remotely. The issue around roles and responsibilities is something that I think we also need to sort of turn our minds to. We've seen how there is obviously a role for municipal government, but we've seen many municipalities who don't. In fact, all municipalities in Ontario in particular, we don't have the tools to be able to incent and do certain things to leverage economic development or economic growth. And many of the instruments that were initially deployed by upper levels of government did not respond to the immediate needs of small urban municipalities. And municipalities, I think, were struggling to find ways of ensuring that they could provide some amount of stimulus, if you will, or to help local businesses. We've talked a lot about the issue of getting public sector projects that are shovel ready post-pandemic, and I believe this is still an important consideration. if you're going to build back and build back quickly, there is a need to ensure that you could create some confidence in individuals and in the economy by getting some of these projects ready when the pandemic is over and people are able to work safely together. So that consideration is important, and the federal government has put some amount of money, so does Ontario, into infrastructure. And I think it's really important for municipalities to get these projects ready and shovel ready to build back stronger and being more resilient. And then the issue about what I describe as the whole of government approach. Building back and a quick recovery would require all hands on deck, and not only within government, but outside of government. And we've heard about some of that today. Municipal governments, indeed any government, cannot do it on their own. You need a business community. You need a level of civic engagement and community engagement. You need all of these institutes and think and do tanks that can provide support. None of us has a monopoly on recovery, and there is no playbook for this. And as I keep saying to my own staff, and I was in Collingwood, none of us is as strong as all of us. And if we are able to put our minds together and engage all the talents that we have in the region, I think we can be better positioned to ensure that we are recovering as quickly as we can from the pandemic. We also need to look at some of the rules and regulations and bylaws that we have in place. And I can go on and on about some of the challenges dealing with sustainable housing and trying to look at urban development standards and whether or not those standards are indeed amenable to building attainable housing. But I wouldn't go there. But I think all hands on deck means that every committee of council, every advisory body has to be able to come together to find ways of ensuring that the recovery is as quickly as we can. So I see Councillor Hamlin is looking at me, strangely. So I will, I will stop there, and perhaps if there's an opportunity, we can get into the Q's and A's. But my apologies, but there's a lot to talk about in this. A lot has been said, and I'd be more than happy to answer or respond to any questions or concerns that you might have. Councillor Hamlin, thanks, and sorry for being a few minutes over the time limit if I was.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Fareed. Very instructive and interesting as usual. And I can see we should be continuing to draw on your expertise as we move forward. So expect a call. Our last speaker is John Dunbar, who's the mayor of Yountville and the president of the League of California Cities. He served as the League's North Bay Division president from 2001 to 12. At the local level, Mayor John Dunbar is engaged in numerous regional and countrywide boards and commissions, and is a board member of the Pathway Home nonprofit veteran treatment program. John, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be a part of this, hearing some very innovative, creative perspectives from around the world. So thank you for allowing me to participate. Since the beginning of the global pandemic, city leaders throughout California have stepped up to manage a public health crisis and the economic recovery from COVID-19, working to protect citizens, maintain essential services, and safely reopen our communities. This has resulted in significant city and town expenses related to the pandemic response and immediate and substantial revenue losses to our municipal budgets caused by the shutdown of our local businesses. Little financial relief has reached cities and towns from state and federal sources for coronavirus expenses, and zero funding has been provided to cities to offset massive revenue shortfalls. Cities have dealt with adversity before, but this COVID-19 is a different type of crisis. I think we all can agree on that. To protect the health and safety of residents and staff, cities overnight transformed traditional public meetings at City Hall into virtual teleconferences. We developed new ways to deliver essential services and found innovative and creative solutions to keep the public engaged and informed. Many of these new ideas and practices likely will become part of how cities do business even after the pandemic. In my town of Yountville, we're under 3,000 total residents. We transitioned to virtual council meetings, online recreational programming, and bill paying, and have supported staff who can work from home with flexible hours to allow for homeschooling of their children and to provide childcare. We also initiated a business support program that permits temporary modifications of use permits in our restaurants, wine tasting rooms, retail shops, and other local businesses to help them remain viable. Examples: in the city of San Jose, the city partnered with a nonprofit organization to offer virtual doctor appointments for needy residents and a hygiene vehicle to provide shower, laundry, and comprehensive case management services. The city also operates its own 3D printer to manufacture personal protective equipment for city staff and healthcare workers. And they even use the library's sewing machines to make masks for homeless residents. The city of Oakland launched the Slow Streets program, which closed 74 miles of city streets to through traffic so that people can more comfortably move along on the streets with reduced vehicle access, enabling physically distant walking, wheelchair access, jogging, and biking through those neighborhoods. In the city of San Diego, local officials turned their convention center into a temporary homeless shelter. And when beaches were closed, instead of firing dozens of city lifeguards, they were asked to pivot and take a new role as safety officers at the convention center, helping to maintain order in public health. In many of our cities in California, and I believe across the United States, vacant hotels and motels have been converted to homeless shelters, providing some relief to an already vulnerable population in our cities. Restaurants required to close or limited to takeout service only have kept workers employed by providing meals for safety net food programs and residents most vulnerable to the coronavirus who have been isolating at home. This pandemic has shined a bright light on how well local works. City leaders throughout the state are doing their best to protect and prioritize the needs of residents and businesses, and are doing it in extraordinary ways. However, the costs associated with the pandemic's impacts are far more than cities and towns can absorb. That's combined with severe and abrupt financial losses that happened quickly, and as was mentioned just a few minutes ago, overnight in our communities. In Yountville, we have a tourism-based economy. More than 70% of our revenues come from transient occupancy or hotel tax and sales tax. When California's executive orders were delivered to shut down hotels, restaurants, retail, and stopped all social gatherings, it was devastating to our budget and our ability to provide essential services for our community. We projected multi-million-dollar losses without even a clear understanding of how long these conditions were going to last. All travel stopped at a time when we would normally have upwards of 90% occupancy in our hotels. We have seen some recovery in the last several weeks, with hotels slowly seeing occupancy increase, with drive market travel resuming. Our restaurants and retail shops have reopened, but they can only operate at very limited capacity. California's 482 cities face a projected $7 billion revenue shortfall as a result of the public health orders that were put in place to slow the coronavirus transmission. Cities are being forced to retool budgets, cut city staff, and reduce critical services that our residents depend on. But despite all this, I continue to see local leaders like we have on our forum today that are demonstrating a resiliency and a determination to make sure our communities can provide hope for our ability to recover and have a positive future. We're going to be putting to the test, really, the learnings, the new insights, the wisdom that we are gaining from this coronavirus response. But working together, we will continue to find and share solutions that work for our cities and our residents throughout California. We will build back better together. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Very interesting to hear. And I loved your phrase that pandemic shows how well local works. So true. Our level of government is so close to what's happening in our communities. Alex tells me that we have one speaker that's not on the agenda, and we will now have that person introduced by Alex. I think it means that we are now out of time for a facilitated discussion with our panelists, sadly. You will have noticed that Liz has put a question on the chat, and I'd ask everyone to have a look at that question, and please put your comments on. The question is, share your ideas on what strikes you as the single most important element that contributes to building back better and why. Okay, over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Yvonne. So our previous speaker, who was experiencing some technical difficulties, is here now, Ms. Michelle Chantal Dubois. She's a health transformation advisor and project development consultant for Gambler First Nations.
Thank you, Alex. Hi, everybody. There was a lot of talk about internet as an essential service. I needed to actually have in rural Manitoba right now, and there is a great deal of need that way. I needed to get a machine to boost my signal to be able to present, actually.
Welcome.
Glad you made it. Glad you made it.
So my presentation today actually fits with even if I was moved on the agenda, because it has to do with health transformation, but it has to do with building a better community and First Nation, better community environment, actually. So I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but I won't be very long. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to present today. When I was informed that this was taking place, I was very enthusiastic, because like all of the element of the program basically touch what we're doing. So I'm just gonna put the context a little bit. For the Canadian, I think that everybody's gonna be familiar with the notion of reconciliation between First Nation and Canadian. And then maybe some are gonna be aware of the process of health transformation. So basically what it is that following 2015 election of the government, Canada started a huge reconciliation process. Health has been a big problem for First Nation, health access in particular. So in 2017, actually, the government started to engage in First Nation consultation, and then sign MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with First Nation that wish to in order for them to take over their own healthcare access. So what we've been doing here in Gambler, and actually is going to be brought to our Southern Chief organization, which is the organization that represents the 34 communities in Southern Manitoba, is that we decided to do health transformation is basically touching only healthcare provisions. But what we decided to do in Gambler is to actually touch the health determinants. And that's why I was so enthusiastic about what you guys are doing. Because in order to improve the health determinant without increase of funding, it's like requires a lot of work and lots of imagination. So what we did, actually, what I did is that I invited Chief, as I spent a lot of time in Cuba and started to do different file with them. I actually invited a delegation of Chief, organized a delegation of Chief last February, to meet with the health minister there. So now in Gambler, we're going to have a doctor acting as a consultant that she's going to do an analysis of all the health determinants. And we're hoping to actually improve a lot of the health outcome that way. So what we're going to do is, what we're doing is that we are basically working with the Health and All Policies principle of the Pan American Health Organization. And then we're going to use the Sustainable Development Goals as our target, and then we're gonna monitor that on a 5 years period. We're actually just going through a phase of engagement with the community members, in order to have them involved in the process and see in terms of the health determinants how we can actually improve that. And then the suggestion is going to be to use social enterprise to transform that into community economic development opportunities, actually, so that we not only engage the members, but also that we create jobs opportunities and then a sense of pride. So this initiative is called Health Transformation for Healing Wellbeing, a new approach to comprehensive community planning. So this is going to be basically done through the community, comprehensive community planning. This is like the plan that are mandatory from INAC. INAC is the Indian, the agency, the ministry responsible for Indian Affairs. So we're hoping to actually demonstrate not only that you can do a lot like with little, but also that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. We're going to keep like the funding, work with the current funding structure and implementing the principle, health in all principle, and targeting like the SND. Then we're going to just like target each of the comprehensive community plan. And then in 5 years from now, we're going to report. So this is all I have to share for now. I will submit in the coming days a PowerPoint presentation, and more is going to be heard from that in the coming months. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present.
Well, thank you so much, Chantal. I'm glad haven't we all had problems with internet? Oh my goodness, it's the time. So as we finish up here, I just wanted to thank all our speakers and our panelists for taking the time to prepare and present your thoughts in this session 4 today on Building Back Better. And to our participants who have filled up our chat with many interesting ideas that we will take forward. Alex, shall I turn this over to you now?
Yes, please. We have been able to, the Premier has sent us a welcome message and message of support. So I'll quickly play that for everybody to enjoy as well.
Welcome to the first ever Habitat in Town Summit. This event brings together community leaders and speakers from around the world to discuss ways to make towns more sustainable. We have the best and the brightest minds here in Canada, and I know many of them are participating in today's event. I hope you get a chance to meet some of them, and I can't wait to hear what you come up with right today. It's going to be a great summit, so thank you, and have a great summit.
So thank you, Mr. Premier, for sending your message of support. That's very, very beneficial for us. So we do have our resolution drafting that will take place after lunch. So this is one of the main outcomes for Habitat in Towns, Collingwood World Summit. I have shared a link previously, and I'll share it again in chat. I encourage everybody to review our current draft on the Google Drive and prepare your remarks, and we'll all participate following lunch. So we will take 45 minutes for lunch, I think, and we'll return here at 1:15. Until then, I'll see you all.
Alex?
Hey,
Michelle, thank you, Michelle.
Can you hear me, Christian?
Yes. Are we having a brief chat now or before the meeting?
Let's brief now.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is that the new additions on women and youth and